Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our next speaker is a man who needs no introduction. The Nobel Prize winning former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency and former Vice President of Egypt, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei. A short introduction such as this cannot justifiably encapsulate Dr. ElBaradei's work as a highly accomplished civil servant, diplomat, and scholar, but I will nevertheless attempt to do so. Dr. ElBaradei has had an illustrious career, beginning his diplomatic service in 1964 at several permanent Egyptian missions to the UN. A special assistant to the foreign minister, he was part of the negotiation team that de-escalated bilateral tensions between Israel and Egypt. Similar to our previous speaker, Dr. ElBaradei has also had an extensive global experience within the field of international law. In the 80s, he was a senior fellow in the UN's International Law Program and an adjunct professor at his alma mater, NYU. He went on to hold senior positions within the UN-affiliated International Atomic Energy Agency, most notably 3 successive terms at the helm as the Director General from 1997 to 2009. A trailblazer in politics, Dr. ElBaradei returned to the public service amidst the turbulent Arab Spring protests, serving as the interim Vice President of Egypt, with a strong emphasis on achieving a peaceful resolution between military forces and Islamist factions. A courageous changemaker, he continues to champion geopolitical causes of paramount importance. Take, for example, his recent piece on the nuclear nightmare in Ukraine. With his tenacity and impressive real-world impact at the highest echelons of the public sector, it is undoubtedly clear why Dr. ElBaradei was awarded the Nile Collar, the highest decoration in Egypt, and the Nobel Peace Prize of 2005 for ensuring the peaceful use of nuclear energy. So eloquently captured in his own words, a durable peace is not a single achievement, but an environment, a process, and a commitment. So now, let us hear from him directly. It is with immense pleasure that I welcome to the virtual stage, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei.
Well, thank you very much for your very kind introduction, which I'm not sure I deserve. I'm honored to take part in your summit. To me, this is the most important summit, and I'm not exaggerating, because you are the leaders who are and will shape the future very soon. We, the mature generation, owe it to you to share our accomplishment, but more importantly, the lessons from our failings. Since the end of the Second World War, humanity has leapfrogged in many fields, breathtaking advances in science and technology, including physics, biosciences, artificial intelligence, communication, medicine, and psychology, to mention a few. We have come better to understand our world, as well as our complex physical and psychological nature. Many new states were established after the end of colonialism, and several international institutions were founded to promote international cooperation. We have been able to save and prolong lives, share knowledge in real time, and establish norms that define and expand our human rights. The new paradigm has improved the quality of life for a growing number of people. But our social, quote-unquote, advancement was unfortunately neither inclusive or equitable. Nevertheless, the trajectory was generally heading toward a more peaceful and humane world. This trajectory has recently been upended. We see an expanding tendency towards authoritarianism and nationalism, while basic principles like pluralism, multilateralism, cooperation, equality, and solidarity, values that we thought we all coalesce around, they are now being frequently challenged and replaced by confrontation, discrimination, self-interest, or even violence. We're not at the end of history, as some of us have declared a few decades ago. We are instead, in my view, at a historic juncture where the future direction is uncertain. To quote Antonio Gramsci, quote, "The old world is dying, that is clear, and the new world struggling to be born. Now is the time of monsters," unquote. And monsters we see clearly everywhere. In Europe, the so-called old continent, a brutal and tragic war has been raging for a year. That's in Europe. A steady fading of democracy in a few EU members. Even a surreal attempted coup in Germany, of all places.
I don't know what you mean by.
And if we take a wider look around the globe, the picture is grim. More than 100 conflicts and wars, widespread famine and food insecurity. We have, I think, like 5 countries going through severe famine today in the 21st century. And menacing pandemic, as we all know, we haven't yet been able to overcome. Last year was an annus horribilis, but by no means it was the only one. The rule-based system we worked hard to build is in crisis. People now cited international humanitarian law intended to reduce the savagery of war, or to put it cynically, kill each other more humanely, is now cited more in terms of violation than compliance. And you can listen and hear the International Committee of the Red Cross complaining, pleading every day. The responsibility to protect principle, articulated less than 2 decades ago, in 2005 in fact, to enable international community to guard against genocide, war crimes, and crime against humanity. The idea now that we will all coalesce to avoid these heinous crimes, but this responsibility to protect is now more rings hollow. Nobody even talked about it. Cases before the International Criminal Court, the ICC, are limited mostly to the weak and defeated. Most cases, in fact, are cases in Africa, with most major powers, India, the US, Russia, China, are not even party to the statute to begin with. They are not members of the court. The International Court of Justice, the highest judicial organ of the global order, have ruled last March that Russia must, quote, immediately suspend the military operation in Ukraine. This was simply ignored. Nobody even talks about it. For a lawyer like myself, who believed in the value and centrality of the rule of law, this growing irrelevance of international norms is very depressing, because if nothing else, it portends anarchy, a global anarchy. We evidently have a crisis of government, both at the international and the national level. And I'm sure you can see it from wherever you are coming from. Governments are increasingly unable to meet people's growing expectations, and politicians are steadily losing public trust. Deep polarization within societies, stoked by misinformation and disinformation on social media. As much as social media has been helping us in many, many ways, the downside of it is also there very clear. But the deep polarization is becoming a permanent feature of many political systems, whether democracies or autocracies. They're both, if you look around, there is a fissure in just about every society. Our international institutions have become dated, divided, paralyzed, and losing legitimacy. If you look at the international financial system, since this is an economic summit, you can see the immorality of the international financial system vis-a-vis the poor and developing countries. They're all international institutions. They're suffering from structural deficiencies, a lack of authority and resources. The failure of the UN Security Council, the body entrusted after the Second World War with the primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, as the Charter stipulates, and is expected to take preventive measures or provided adequate responses, has become completely impotent due to the veto power, among other things. The Ukraine war is the latest appalling example, when the Council cannot even adopt any resolution on the question of the war in Ukraine. Conflicts, therefore, were left to fester for generations. You can look at the Palestinian issue, the Korean issue, and they don't improve with time. In fact, they get much worse. Sadly, in general, violence and war have dominated the human timeline since recorded history. Hundreds of millions have lost their lives under the guise of religion, nationalism, ethnicity, and other casus bellis. Senseless, destructive, dehumanizing conflicts. The mindset is one of Carthago delenda est. Let us just destroy. We can barely remember the causes of those wars. Some of the states involved no longer even exist. But the people who were killed also do not exist. We organize ourselves around city-states, empires, and sovereign states. We went through different phases. We created the League of Nations, followed by the United Nations, whose objective was, and still is, to save succeeding generation from the scourge of war. That's the language of the statute. However, force and violence have often remained our method of choice to settle our differences. The war in Ukraine, which is everywhere in the media, people forget sometimes that is coming on the heels of Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other gruesome conflicts. They simply did not happen in Europe or in the West, and that's why they don't get the same kind of attention. That's another issue. The genocide in Rwanda and Srebrenica, both less than 3 decades ago, are fresh reminder of the level that human viciousness and malice could reach under certain circumstances. There's no bottom line, unfortunately. It is clear that poverty, inequality, and tyranny are the root causes of conflicts and violence. Today, as we speak, there are almost 700 million people living in extreme poverty. That is less than $2.15 a day. An increased number as a result of the pandemic emergency and the Ukraine conflict. Meanwhile, half the world population is not really in the greatest shape. They're struggling to meet basic needs, food and health, education, housing. The United Nations today and partner organizations are almost passing the hat, almost begging for $51.5 billion to provide emergency assistance to 230 million people of the world most vulnerable in 68 countries. And the number, as I see every day, is going up. And it is almost certain that the UN will not reach even that funding target, $51 million. The top UN emergency relief official have just stated recently that it is expected to be very difficult to achieve the full amount requested. Very difficult. And I don't think they will do it. However, the world was more than content to spend $2 trillion on armament in 2021. $2 trillion. It is clearly, obviously, our skewed priorities and slanted mindset that led us to where we are. The degree of inequality among countries and people extends to the very sanctity of human life, to the core of human existence. This has been laid bare with the COVID-19 pandemic, Ukraine war, and the treatment of refugees. Recent examples, all of them. While 86% of people in EU have been fully vaccinated, we have taken 4 or 5 shots. Only 25.6% of people in Africa are. 25%. And while most of the world is reacting, as it should be, to the war in Ukraine, it has limited itself to hand-wringing when hundreds of thousands of civilians have been killed in Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and other places. The treatment of refugees fleeing death and destruction. They are not really looking forward to be refugees, but they're going out of hell situation. It's no different in terms of double standards. While refugees from Ukraine are rightfully received with open arms and considered as one of us, those from Africa and the Middle East are left at times deliberately to drown or be placed in atrocious detention camps in Libya and other places. Tyranny is the hallmark of 1/3 of the world nations. The trampling of human rights by authoritarian regimes is becoming almost a spectator sport for the international community, reduced to cynically voicing every time our deep concern. Most democracies invariably continue business as usual with despots and authoritarian regimes. The argument being that it is a choice between the bad, which is repression, and the much worse, which is instability. But it is no surprise that the credibility of those democracies among people struggling for human dignity, and I'm sure many of you who are coming from the global south see that, the credibility has almost vanished, paving the way to rising radicalism and cynicism. This loss of credibility has not been helped by reports of aiding and abetting torture and rendition on the part of the West, on the part of the mature democracies. And other violations of basic human rights are still going on. If you look at this so-called target killing, a drone will just go and kill somebody. Poverty, inequality, and tyranny are lethal weapons of mass destruction. And this is something I've said in my Nobel lecture in 2005, almost 18 years ago. Why? Because they are invariably compounded by and result in human rights abuses, lack of good governance, marginalization, and deep sense of injustice. This combination creates a fertile breeding ground for violence and extremism. Extremism doesn't come from just out of the blues. There are causes and reasons, and we need to understand why we have extremism, why we have violence. In our increasingly interconnected world, our most significant threats are threats without borders. They defy borders. They all need international cooperation. Whether it's weapons of mass destruction, communicable diseases, look at COVID recently, climate change, again, look at what is happening, cybersecurity, terrorism, human trafficking, and illegal drugs. Some notable example of horrible challenges we are facing where no one country, no matter how powerful, can deal with it on its own. No one. And no part of the world can any longer be immune, quarantined. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, many of our governments are unable to understand that cooperation and solidarity, not confrontation and short-term self-interest, are key to human survival and progress. This could not be more apparent than in the two existential threats we face: the climate crisis and the threat of nuclear weapons, or the nuclear danger. Global warming is fueling environmental degradation, as you know, natural disasters, weather extremes, sea levels are rising, the Arctic is melting, and forests are burning. The world is completely upended, or our planet is completely upended in every aspect and in every way. The recent report by the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, stated unambiguously that we are very far from the 2016 Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5, and that we need enormous cuts in greenhouse gases, 45% to get on track to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and 30% for 2 degrees Celsius. The experts, in addition, warned that the status quo points to 2.4 to 2.6 temperature rise by the end of the century if we continue business as usual. But despite this bleak, clear warning, the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, the so-called COP27, which met last November in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, failed miserably to make any progress to cut greenhouse gases emissions. We have seen, many of you, a lot of squabbling, a lot of mutual accusation, but zero progress. As a consequence, according to the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, quote, and he put it politely, our planet is still in the emergency room, and a climate catastrophe is still looming. The threat of nuclear weapons has reared its ugly head again in the midst of the Ukraine war. It's not enough that we have a war and killing and destruction, but no, the ugly head of the possibility of nuclear weapons is coming back. When President Putin warned that any intervening power would be met with, quote, consequences as you have never before experienced in your history. God help us. This was followed by putting Russia's nuclear forces on high alert. Many leaders in the West, of course, quickly responded by emphasizing that we too possess nuclear weapons and are able to use them as a response. Of course, the DPRK, North Korea, did not miss the opportunity to remind the world, to remind all of us, that it too has nuclear weapons ready for use. This loose talk, irresponsible talk about nuclear weapons, no matter in what context or scenario, has somehow shifted their use from an unimaginable nightmare to a realistic possibility. This is, for some of you young enough, is the first confrontation between major nuclear weapon states since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, 60 years ago, when the world at that time teetered on the precipice of a nuclear conflagration. As early as 1967, former US Secretary of Defense Bob McNamara, who was heavily involved in the Vietnam War and in the Cuban Missile Crisis, stated that the horror of nuclear weapons and their impact, quote, could dwarf any catastrophe that has befallen man in his more than, listen to that, million years on Earth. Million years on Earth. And that the indefinite combination of human fallibility and nuclear weapons will lead to the destruction of nations. And human fallibility we are familiar with every single day. The conclusion was clear for him, was very clear. The only way to eliminate the risk is to eliminate nuclear weapons. In 2011, former US Secretary of Defense, my friend Bill Perry, mentioned 3 false alarms he knew of in which Soviet missiles were thought to be streaming toward the US. He said that to this day, I believe that we avoided nuclear catastrophe as much as by good luck as by good management. By good luck. But with all this, and a quarter of a century after the end of the Cold War, we still have over 13,000 nuclear weapons and around maybe 2,000 in so-called high alert status, prompt launch, ready to go in matter of minutes. And all the 9 nuclear armed states are in a frantic race, all of them, without exception, are in a frantic race to modernize their nuclear arsenals. So they'll get more sophisticated, more destructive weapons because we don't have enough. It is no surprise that all nuclear experts agree that the nuclear danger, namely the possibility of a nuclear weapon use, whether intentionally, accidentally, or as a result of a cyber manipulation, a new horror threat we have now, the cyber possibilities, is higher than any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, is higher than any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago. It is no surprise also that the doomsday clock, a symbol that represents how close we are to destroying the world with technologies of our own making, has been set last month to 90 seconds to midnight. This is the closest to global catastrophe it has ever been since it was founded in 1947 by a group of atomic scientists, and I think Einstein was one of them. The paradox is that we make every day lots of noise about the major dangers we all face, but we continue in the same old ways. We seem incapable of addressing symptoms, let alone causes. And the symptoms are very visible. Violence is proliferating. Extremism is metastasizing. Poverty and inequality are becoming obscene. Tyranny is spreading. And the global security system established in 1948 with the UN Charter is falling apart. It is obvious, in my opinion at least, that a global dialogue is desperately needed to recalibrate and coalesce around basic norms and values fundamental to our survival. We need a clash of ideas to avoid descending into the proverbial clash of civilization. We need to address global challenges through global responses, where the dignity of every human being is our first priority. We need to shift from the focus from rivalry and competition to cooperation and complementarity. We can't afford anything else, and emphasize values, policies, and institutions that promote dignity and champion freedom and equity, with zero tolerance for tyranny and repression anywhere. We know that coping with dictators is tricky and complex, but we ought to think of better options than regime change, as we have seen in Iraq and the horror ensued, dumb sanctions, as we now see in Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, Russia, which basically hurt the people, not the regimes. At that time, I think 20 years ago after Iraq, we continue to talk about smart sanctions, that sanction that does not impact on innocent civilian. We haven't done that. All the sanctions we approve are dumb sanctions. And what we see even last week, what happened in northwest of Syria, where during the earthquake, when assistance could not come because, among other reasons, sanctions and war, people died that should not have died because of our irrational, unethical, immoral policies. But we need to think of something, even if we apply sanction, something smart that address the regime and not the people. Instead, we are continue to embrace despots and arming them to the teeth, selling them as much arms so we can continue, to give wheel or oil the wheels of our economies. A crucial priority is to confront the two elephants in the room I just mentioned, the climate danger and the nuclear danger. A key for addressing the climate crisis is for major economies to significantly cut their greenhouse gases emissions and support the global south to mitigate and adapt the impact of climate change. Climate crisis that the global south has nothing to do in where we are, but yet they are paying the heaviest price. The commitment at the 2009 Climate Summit in Copenhagen to channel $1 billion per year to developing countries by 2020 has regrettably not been met. One of the many promises of assistance that has not been met. The recent establishment last year at COP27 of a loss and damage fund to assist countries most vulnerable and impacted by climate change is clearly a good first step. Still, a committee this year will still decide what form the fund should take, which countries should contribute, and where and how the money should be distributed. Given the track record of developed countries in providing assistance, the proof of the pudding, as they say, still very much remains in the eating. Regarding the nuclear danger, we need to revisit the doctrine of so-called mutual assured destruction, aptly summarized as MAD, and it is MAD. It is a doctrine aptly described in 1988 by the then Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi as, quote, the ultimate expression of the philosophy of terrorism, holding humanity hostage to the presumed security needs of a few. We see that very much now during the Ukraine war. The whole world is sitting anxiously looking, how this war will end, how this war will escalate, and what is the impact, whether people will use nuclear weapons. We are all sitting helplessly waiting to see the outcome. This is a doctrine, the mutual assured destruction, based on my view, colonial premise that some are more equal than others, that some countries possess nuclear weapons or are protected by them within alliance. These are like 30 countries out of 192 or 93. While asking others not to have them, not to touch them, not to get nuclear weapons. Rightly so, rightly so. But it is an oxymoron on the long term. It is not only unfair, but more importantly, unsustainable to expect countries that we continue to rely on this ultimate deterrence nuclear weapon, but you cannot touch it, even if you feel insecure. The 2021 Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that has been initiated by non-nuclear weapon states, the so-called Ban Treaty, was adopted by 122 states against the opposition of all the weapon states, all of them. But it is the first legally binding international agreement to oppose the status quo and to comprehensively prohibit nuclear weapons with the aim of total elimination. This is the way to go, in my view. We must nurture a new mindset where peace and security are approached as an inclusive and collective undertaking based on equity, trust, dialogue, and solidarity. We need a functioning system of collective security based on fairness and inclusiveness, not exclusivity. In such a system, nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction have absolutely no place. We equally need a fresh approach to our governance modalities and institutions, both nationally and internationally, to be able to cope with the common challenges we face. I conclude by saying that if we focus on human dignity, our raison d'etre, we will be able to understand that we are one human family, irrespective of our superficial differences of race, religion, or ethnicity, or whatever other differences we think we have. In the words of William James, we are islands in the sea, separate on the surface, but connected in the deep. We ought to have realized by now that it is not a zero-sum game, that we are not free unless everybody is free. We are not secure unless everyone is secure. We will either swim together or sink together. There's no other alternatives. Somehow, we have lost our way. It is up to us to make sure that what we see at the end of the tunnel is a light and not an oncoming train. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. ElBaradei. What an incredible keynote that was, and testament to your staunch advocacy, your continued efforts towards achieving world peace, and your talk today has been an inspiration to us all. I believe that you touched upon a multitude of topics, and they were extremely interesting. And I'm really interested to know what the audience has to say on that, such as the hypocrisy of nuclear weapon states, dissecting extremism, and the current need for global cooperation amidst geopolitical conflict and the role of climate change. So without further ado, let's get right into the Q&A session. I'm just waiting for questions to come in through the Slido platform. They will be appearing here shortly.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, it seems we have a question on the 2021. I think it's reference to your talk on the 2021 Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. You mentioned in your speech that the threat of nuclear attack is at the highest level since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Do you believe that this treaty will take the positive steps that are necessary in de-escalating that threat? And where do you think the roadmap is from here?
Well, this treaty came into being after the weapon states failed in their commitment to disarm. In 1970, they made a solemn commitment under the non-proliferation treaty that countries that do not have nuclear weapons should not have nuclear weapons. But we, the 5 nuclear weapon state party to that treaty at the time, commit to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects. This was 1970. 50 years ago, today, we don't see any sign of nuclear disarmament. As I mentioned, there are 13,000 nuclear weapons, and they keep modernizing and they keep making it more lethal. So the non-nuclear weapon states decided to get together and have this new treaty, the 2021 treaty, which says a ban treaty. You ban nuclear weapons and you disarm and you eliminate. Of course, all the weapon states putting a lot of objection to that. They didn't even attend the meeting. They are not party to the treaty. But I think that the challenge now is for the majority of the world, that at least the 160 countries that are not relying on nuclear weapons, either having them or part of an alliance like NATO alliance or special security agreement, they need to continue to push, continue to make that treaty a customary norm of international law, continue to speak, on the need to eliminate nuclear weapons. What would help a lot is the public opinion that continue to support those who believe in nuclear disarmament. As many of you young people have done with climate change, I think what you need to do right now is the same with nuclear weapons. Basically say, we don't want to live under this Damocles sword. We don't want to live under, the threat that tomorrow we will see a different world than what we have today because somebody decided to use their nuclear weapons. So it's work in progress. Its success depends on, in my view, civil society, public opinion. Basically send a clear message to the US, to China, to Russia, to India, to all the 9 of them. We don't want to see nuclear weapons. We think we don't live in a world when we are susceptible to instant destruction, because one of you have decided to use nuclear weapon. I should maybe tell you that the Russian and the Americans have, the president of Russia or the president of the US have 7 to 8 minutes to decide whether to use nuclear weapon in response to a purported nuclear attack. This could be misinformation, could be a computer error, but it has 7 to 8 minutes to decide that. And with that, we might end up destroying the world because of a computer error. This is not irresponsible. Well, I don't know how to say. It's almost criminal to me. That we are all held hostage to a system that should not exist. So it is up to us right now to make it loud, to speak loud and clear. We want to keep our environment, safe, healthy. We need to keep the biodiversity, but we also do not want nuclear weapons. We need to live as human beings. We need to live and see how we can cooperate together and help each other and not use force to settle our differences. These are not difficult. They are not difficult, but we have to put the seeds for that. We need to make sure that there is no poverty, that there is no inequality, which we see every single day. Every human have to feel the human dignity. I don't know how you can, detail it, but we all know what human dignity is. I am free. I have enough to eat. I have enough to take care of my kids. If we have human dignity, my strong feeling that we will neither need to fight each other or kill each other, and we will work together to keep our planet intact.
Right, Doctor, and thank you for your explanation of that and our role in preventing this mutually assured destruction.
Sure.
And I just have one last question to close it off, which
Sure.
is, as we were talking about previously on the desensitization of these global conflicts in the age of social media. We're hearing about what's happening in Iran. We're hearing about Ukraine. We're hearing about Yemen. We're hearing about conflicts all across the world. How do we ensure that each and every one of us speaks out against these conflicts in order to prevent this desensitization and to really make our voices have a change in this world?
I think, as we discussed before the session, you and I, social media have sanitized us. Now it's normal that we wake up in the morning, we look at our website, and we see that hundreds of people died here, 1,000, were killed there. We need to understand that we have, as individual responsibility, as John Paul Sartre used to say, or argue, that each one of us is responsible for whatever is happening, that we cannot just sit to be silent observers, that we cannot just say, well, these are governments responsible, they are accountable to us. And that's why democracy is very important. They are accountable to us. And we need to hold them to account. And we need to take them to take them to task. We don't want that. We don't want, anybody to die. But the worst part also of it, that see how much coverage we have in Ukraine, and see how much coverage we have, say, in Yemen. 2/3 of the Yemeni people are going through famine today, but hardly you see much on that. But every day you see 100 stories on Ukraine. Well, some people, you get the feeling that some people's lives are more important than others. So if you die in Vancouver, as I again usually say, you will see lots of coverage. But if you see somebody dying in Darfur, well, the coverage is maybe 1% of what you get. We need to make everybody, and this is the global south, the anger in the global south, and I come from the global south, and I know how the frustration, the feeling of inequality, we need to make them understand that we are all the same. We have the same rights, we have the same dignity, we are entitled to the same protection. If somebody dies in Yemen today, I should have the same response, the same reaction as I do if somebody die in Kansas City. But that's not what's happening. It's a media environment. It's a social media and all the media where we feel that somehow some people, it's okay that they die because they are developing countries, because they are, this is their fate in a way, But us, mature democracy, we shouldn't, But what we don't understand, that this creates a huge distrust between the North and the South. And that is the thing I worry about again every day, the gap in distrust that is expanding. And I, for example, I mentioned COVID. Why I'm getting all the vaccine I need, and somebody in Burkina Faso is not getting any. He's a human being as much as I am, if not better. Why is he getting the short end of the stick? So it's a lot of it is really a question of values and change of mindset. If we finally understand that our survival is not our ethical values, but our survival depend on equality, equity, solidarity, cooperation. I think that is our way to the future. And again, I look at you. That's why when I said your summit is, to me, is much better than any other one, because you are the one who are going to take over sooner or later. Hopefully, you will take over. And I hope when you take over, you will come with a different outlook. And you should come with a different outlook. You have been trained differently. You have gone through a different experience. And people like you have getting the best education, who have been access to all the technology, should really manage this little planet of ours, this human race we are, in a much more ethical, in a much more decency, in a much more decent world.
Thank you, Dr. ElBaradei, for your passionate, pertinent, and illuminating speech.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks. I'm happy to be with you. It's an honor again to be with you.
No, Dr. ElBaradei, the honor is really ours.
Thank you.
And to our audience, just a general announcement. We will be having lunch from now until 2:30 for our final in-person panel on space, cooperation, or colonization.
Excellent.
As well as an EY Parthenon seminar, which will be happening in OC02 during the same period. We will also be having a concurrent seminar by Streetscope, which will be virtual in OC108.
Great.
We hope to see you later for...
Great. I look forward to that. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, Dr. ElBaradei. Thank you. And you too. You too.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.